What if the most dangerous moment in your life looked completely harmless on the surface? Because sometimes the biggest traps don't come with threats or warnings. They come with calm voices, polite smiles, and a simple request that sounds too normal to question. And that's exactly how it began for me, not with an argument, not with pressure, but with something that felt so ordinary it almost worked. The afternoon was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes everything feel safe, predictable, like nothing unexpected could possibly happen. And I was sitting there going through small routines, the same ones I had followed for years when they walked in, not rushed, not nervous, just prepared in a way I didn't fully understand at first. Have you ever noticed when people act too calm, like they've already decided something without you? Because that's what it felt like. They greeted me the same way they always did, their tones soft, controlled, almost careful, but there was something underneath it, something slightly different, something I couldn't name yet, but I could feel it. And then, without building up to it, without explanation that made real sense, they placed it in front of me. Papers, clean, organized, official looking, the kind of documents that don't raise suspicion immediately because they're designed not to. Have you ever been handed something important and told it was nothing? Because that's exactly what happened. It's just a form, they said, nothing complicated. We're just making things easier. Simple words, calm tone, no pressure. At least not obvious pressure, but pressure doesn't always come loudly, it comes through expectation, through the way they wait for your response, through the way they assume you won't question it. Have you ever felt like something was expected from you before you even agreed to it? Because that's what this moment was. I didn't touch the papers immediately. I didn't reach for the pen. I didn't react the way they thought I would because something inside me paused, not fear, not panic, but awareness. The kind that comes quietly when something doesn't feel right, even if you can't explain why yet. Have you ever had that feeling that something is wrong, but you don't have proof? Because that feeling matters more than people realize. I looked at the pages slowly, not reading every word yet, just observing, noticing small things, the way they were already marked, the places where signatures were expected, the way everything had been prepared in advance, as if my role in this situation had already been decided before I even saw it. And that realization, that was the first moment something shifted. Have you ever realized that a decision about you was made without you? Because that's what it felt like. They stood there waiting, not impatiently, not aggressively, but confidently, as if this was just another step in something already moving forward, and I could feel it in the way they looked at me, not with concern, not with care, but with expectation. And expectation can reveal more than words. I picked up the first page slowly, my eyes moving across the lines, not rushing, not reacting, just taking it in, because I wasn't going to let them control the pace of this moment. Have you ever slowed down on purpose just to understand what's really happening? Because that's exactly what I did. The words were formal, structured, written in a way that made everything sound reasonable, harmless even, but something about them didn't sit right, not clearly, not immediately, just enough to stay in my mind longer than it should have. I didn't show that, I didn't question it out loud. I didn't reveal that something felt off, because sometimes the most important thing you can do is observe without reacting. Have you ever stayed quiet just to see what someone would do next? Because that silence gives you information, and they filled that silence quickly, reassurances, explanations that sounded helpful. Words like future, security, simplifying things, all carefully chosen, all designed to make the moment feel safe, but safe things don't usually need that much explanation. Have you ever noticed that the more someone explains something, the more you start to question it? Because that's what was happening inside me. I nodded slowly, not agreeing, not refusing, just acknowledging, because I needed them to believe I was still exactly who they thought I was. Someone who wouldn't question too much, someone who would trust without looking deeper, someone who would sign, and that belief was exactly what I needed them to hold on to. I placed the paper back down gently, my movements calm, controlled, as if nothing inside me had changed, even though everything had. Because in that moment, I understood something important, not completely, not fully, but enough. This wasn't random, this wasn't casual, this had been planned, and I was only seeing one part of it. Have you ever realized that what's in front of you is only a small piece of something bigger? Because that realization changes how you respond. I reached for the pens slowly, feeling their attention sharpen slightly, their focus tightening, as if this was the moment they had been waiting for, and I could almost sense their relief building before anything had even happened. And that's when I made a decision, not to refuse, not to argue, not to expose what I was starting to understand, but something far more important. I decided to wait, to watch, to understand everything before I did anything at all, because once you act too early, you lose the advantage. Have you ever realized that the right move isn't always immediate, it's strategic? Because that's what this moment became. I placed the pen back down, not dramatically, not suspiciously, just calmly, as if I needed more time, as if I was unsure, as if I was exactly the person they believed I was. And they accepted that too easily. And that told me everything, because the moment they thought I didn't understand those papers was the moment I started uncovering the truth they were trying to hide. Have you ever felt something was wrong, not because of what you could see clearly, but because of what didn't quite fit together? The small details that seem harmless on their own but form a pattern when you look closely enough. Because that's exactly where I found myself after they handed me those papers, not reacting, not confronting, but thinking in a way I hadn't needed to for a long time. Because this wasn't about what they told me, it was about what they didn't. The room was quiet again after they stepped away, their confidence still lingering in the air, as if they believed the outcome was already decided, as if my hesitation was temporary, something that would pass once I stopped overthinking what they had carefully presented as simple. Have you ever noticed how people assume your silence means agreement? Because that assumption can reveal everything. I picked up the papers again slowly, this time not just looking, but reading line by line, not rushing, not letting their earlier explanations shape what I saw, because the moment you rely on someone else's interpretation, you stop seeing the truth for yourself. Have you ever realized that the truth isn't hidden, it's just written in a way most people don't question? Because that's exactly what this felt like. The language was formal, structured, almost reassuring at first glance, but the deeper I went, the more something began to shift, not suddenly, not dramatically, but enough that I couldn't ignore it anymore. Words that seemed harmless started to connect in ways that didn't feel right. Phrases that sounded supportive began to carry a different weight, and slowly, piece by piece, the meaning behind it all began to form. Have you ever read something twice and realized it meant something completely different the second time? Because that's what was happening. I leaned back slightly, letting the pages rest in my hands, not because I was confused, but because I was beginning to understand, and understanding changes how you feel about everything. This wasn't about helping me, it wasn't about simplifying anything. It was about control, about shifting something from me without making it look like it was being taken. And that realization didn't come with panic, it came with clarity. Have you ever realized someone was trying to take something from you without saying it directly? Because that's what this was. The structure of it all became clearer the more I read. Certain sections gave authority where there had been none before. Certain terms transferred responsibility in ways that didn't benefit me. And the most important part, the part they expected me not to notice, was buried in language designed to look ordinary. But ordinary things don't usually require that much precision. Have you ever noticed that the most important details are often hidden in the smallest lines? Because that's exactly where the truth was. I felt something settle inside me then, not fear, not anger, but certainty, the kind that doesn't need confirmation once it arrives, because everything I had sensed before, every small moment of discomfort, every quiet doubt, it all connected now. This wasn't a misunderstanding, this was intentional, planned, carefully prepared, and I had almost signed it without question. Have you ever realized how close you were to making a mistake just because you trusted the wrong moment? Because that realization stays with you. But instead of reacting, instead of confronting them with what I now understood, I did something else. I stayed exactly where I was, calm, steady, because reacting would have changed everything and not in my favor. If they knew I understood, they would adjust. They would move faster. They would protect themselves. Have you ever realized that showing your awareness too soon gives away your advantage? Because that's what I knew now. I placed the papers down slowly, exactly the way I had before, not revealing anything, not letting even a small reaction show on my face, because control in situations like this doesn't come from what you say, it comes from what you choose not to show. And that silence, that controlled silence, gave me something they didn't realize I now had time. Time to think, time to plan, time to understand everything before they made their next move. Have you ever realized that time is the most powerful thing you can gain in a situation like this? Because that's what I had just created. Their voices returned not long after, casual, confident, unchanged, as if nothing had shifted, as if the outcome was still moving in the direction they expected, and I let them believe that. I nodded when they spoke, I responded softly. I asked simple questions that made me seem uncertain rather than aware, and they accepted it completely. Have you ever seen someone relax because they think you don't understand what's happening? Because that relaxation is where mistakes begin. Their tones softened, their explanations became shorter, less careful, because from their perspective, there was no reason to be cautious anymore. They believed I was exactly where they needed me to be, and that belief was the biggest mistake they could make. I watch them differently now, not emotionally, not with anger, but with focus, because once you understand someone's intention, every action they take becomes easier to read. Every word carries meaning, every pause reveals something, and slowly everything they did confirmed what I already knew. This wasn't about helping me, this was about taking something from me in a way I wouldn't resist. But I wasn't going to resist the way they expected. I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to refuse immediately, because doing that would only stop me from seeing how far they were willing to go. Have you ever realized that sometimes the smartest move is to let things continue just a little longer? Because that's exactly what I chose to do. Because instead of stopping them right there, I decided to play along, and that's when they started revealing more than they ever planned to. What if the moment people think you don't understand is the moment you understand everything? Because most plans rely on one assumption, that you won't question, that you won't notice, that you'll simply follow along. And the moment that assumption feels safe to them, they stop being careful, and that's exactly where I needed them to be, not alert, not cautious, but comfortable enough to reveal what they never intended to show. Have you ever realized that being underestimated can become your greatest advantage? Because that's what I chose to become, not truly unaware, but convincingly so. The next time we sat together, nothing felt different to them. The same calm tone, the same reassuring words, the same expectations sitting quietly between us, but everything was different for me because now I wasn't part of the moment, I was studying it. Every word they used, every glance they exchanged, every pause they didn't realize I noticed, it all became information. Have you ever watched people closely after you stop trusting them? Because what you see then is completely different. I slowed my responses, not dramatically, just enough to make them believe I was uncertain, asking small questions I already knew the answers to, repeating things they had already explained, letting them guide the conversation the way they wanted, because the more they felt in control, the more they revealed. And they revealed more than they realized. Have you ever pretended not to understand just to see how someone explains something twice? Because the second explanation is always more honest. Their tone shifted subtly, becoming more direct, less careful, because from their perspective, they weren't dealing with someone who would challenge them. They were guiding someone who would eventually agree, and that belief made them comfortable. Too comfortable, they began to speak with more certainty, less hesitation, as if the outcome was already decided, as if my role in this situation had already been reduced to a formality, a signature, nothing more. Have you ever seen someone act like they've already won before anything is finalized? Because that's exactly what this felt like, and I let it continue. I nodded at the right moments. I stayed quiet when they expected me to be unsure. I asked questions that made me seem dependent on their explanations rather than aware of what they were doing, and slowly, piece by piece, they stopped filtering themselves. Not completely, not openly, but enough. Enough for me to see the pattern clearly. Have you ever realized that people reveal their true intentions when they think you're no longer a threat? Because that's what this became. The conversations extended beyond the papers now. They talked about future plans, about what would be easier, about arrangements that sounded harmless on the surface but carried something else underneath, decisions that didn't include me, outcomes that were being shaped without my voice. And that told me everything. This wasn't a single moment. This wasn't just about those papers. This was part of something bigger, something already in motion. Have you ever realized that one action is actually part of a larger plan you haven't fully seen yet? Because that's exactly what I understood now. But understanding wasn't enough. I needed certainty. I needed to know exactly how far this went, exactly what they were preparing for, exactly what I was dealing with, because acting without full understanding would only leave room for mistakes. And I wasn't going to make any. Have you ever known that you needed more information before making your next move? Because that's what this moment required. So I stayed exactly where they expected me to be, calm, quiet. Slightly unsure, the version of me they had already accepted. And that version gave me access to their words, their assumptions, their confidence, the kind that grows when people believe they are not being questioned. Have you ever seen someone relax because they think you're not paying attention? Because that's when they reveal the most. And they did, small details at first, then more, enough to confirm that this wasn't just about simplifying anything, it was about control. About shifting ownership, about ensuring that when the time came, I would no longer have a say, and that realization didn't scare me, it focused me completely, because now I knew exactly what I was dealing with. And once you know that, the next step becomes clear. Have you ever reached a point where everything suddenly makes sense and you know exactly what you need to do next? Because that's where I was. I didn't show it. I didn't change my behavior. I didn't let even a small part of my understanding become visible, because the moment they suspected anything, everything would change. And I needed them exactly where they were: confident, comfortable, unprepared. I let the conversation end the way they expected. I let them leave believing they were moving closer to their goal. I let them carry that certainty with them, because that certainty was going to be their biggest mistake. Because while they believed I was getting closer to signing those papers, I had already started making moves that would change everything before they even realized it. What if the real turning point doesn't happen when you say no, but when you quietly make yes impossible? Because most people prepare for resistance, they expect arguments, delays, maybe even refusal, but they don't prepare for a situation where their entire plan stops working before they even realize it has begun. And that's exactly the kind of move I decided to make, not loudly, not emotionally, but carefully, completely, and ahead of them. Have you ever realized that the strongest move is the one no one sees? Because that's where I was now, no longer observing, no longer waiting, but acting, step by step, in a way that didn't change how they saw me, but changed everything about what they could do. The days that followed looked exactly the same on the surface: the same conversations, the same carefully controlled tone from them, the same quiet expectation building with each visit, but underneath that calm, everything had already begun to shift. I didn't rush, I didn't let urgency control me, because urgency leads to mistakes, and mistakes were something I couldn't afford now. Have you ever slowed yourself down because you knew rushing would cost you everything? Because that's what this required: precision. I began with the parts they believed were already secure, the things they assumed would remain exactly where they were until the moment they needed them, and I changed those things, not in a way that created attention, not in a way that could be noticed immediately, but in a way that removed access quietly, completely, without confrontation. Have you ever taken control of something without anyone realizing it had changed hands? Because that's exactly what I did. Every step was deliberate, every detail considered, because I understood something they didn't. This wasn't just about stopping their plan, it was about ensuring that even if they tried again, there would be nothing left for them to take. And that kind of security doesn't come from one action, it comes from layers. I spoke to the right people, not explaining everything, not revealing more than necessary, but enough for them to understand the direction I needed to go, because when you involve the right support, things move differently. More efficiently, more safely. Have you ever realized that having the right person on your side changes the entire outcome? Because that's what I felt now: not alone, not uncertain, but supported in a way that gave me confidence without needing to show it. I kept everything simple on the outside. That was important. My behavior didn't change. My tone stayed the same. I still asked small questions. I still appeared unsure. I still let them believe that everything was moving exactly as they expected, because that illusion was what kept them relaxed and their comfort was my advantage. Have you ever noticed how people stop being careful when they think everything is going their way? Because that's what I needed them to feel. And they did. Their confidence grew. Their conversations became shorter, less cautious, more direct, because from their perspective, there was no longer a reason to be careful. They believed the outcome was inevitable, and that belief made them blind to what was happening around them. Meanwhile, I continued quietly, step by step, making sure that every path they thought they could take led nowhere. Have you ever closed every door without anyone hearing them shut? Because that's exactly what this was. By the time I was done, there was nothing left for them to control, nothing left they could shift, nothing left they could take. Even if they had the papers, even if they had the signature, it wouldn't matter anymore, because what they believed those papers would give them no longer existed in the way they expected. And that was the most important part. Have you ever realized that sometimes the goal isn't to stop something, but to make it meaningless? Because that's exactly what I had done. But even then, I didn't rush to reveal it. I didn't confront them. I didn't change the pace of what was happening, because timing matters just as much as action, and revealing everything too early would have taken away the impact of what was coming next. Have you ever known something powerful and chosen to wait before using it? Because that's where control truly exists. I let them continue. I let them believe. I let them move closer to what they thought was their goal, because the closer they got, the harder the fall would be when they realized the truth. And in that waiting, something else became clear: not just their plan, but their confidence in it, the way they had already begun to act as if everything belonged to them, as if the outcome was already secured, as if I had already agreed without even signing anything yet. And that confidence was exactly what I needed. Have you ever seen someone celebrate too early without realizing they've already lost? Because that's exactly what I was watching. And the more I watched, the more certain I became this wasn't just about protecting myself anymore. This was about showing them something they would never forget, not through anger, not through confrontation, but through truth. Clear, undeniable truth that they wouldn't be able to ignore or change once it was revealed. Because by the time they asked me to sign those papers again, everything they thought they were getting was already gone. What if the moment someone feels most certain they've won is the exact moment everything starts slipping away from them? Because confidence without awareness doesn't protect you, it blinds you, and that's exactly where they were now, moving forward with complete certainty, believing everything was still under their control, not realizing that control had already shifted quietly, completely, and permanently. Have you ever seen someone walk straight into a situation, thinking they understand it when they don't understand it at all? Because that's what I was watching unfold. The days passed calmly, almost too calmly, the kind of quiet that feels like everything is settling into place, but only one side truly knows what that place is, and I continued exactly as I had before. No sudden changes, no visible resistance, no reaction that could make them question anything. I remained the version of me they had already accepted, slightly unsure, slightly dependent, easy to guide, easy to convince. And that version gave me something they didn't realize they were giving me: time to complete everything without interruption. Have you ever realized that sometimes the best protection is letting people underestimate you? Because that's what kept them relaxed. Their conversations became shorter now, more confident, less careful, because in their minds there was nothing left to worry about. The plan was moving forward, the outcome was certain. And I could see it in the way they spoke, the way they looked at me, the way they no longer felt the need to explain every detail. Have you ever noticed how people stop explaining things once they believe you've already agreed? Because that silence from them told me everything I needed to know. They had stopped preparing, they had stopped adjusting, they had stopped questioning, and that meant one thing: they believed they had already won. But what they didn't understand was that their plan no longer had anything to stand on, not anymore. Have you ever removed the foundation of something while everything above it still looks the same? Because that's exactly what I had done. Every step I needed to take had already been completed, every change had already been made, every detail had already been secured, and from their perspective, nothing had changed. That was the most important part, because the biggest shift had already happened and they didn't even know it yet. I watched them carefully now, not emotionally, not with anger, but with clarity, because clarity allows you to see things without distortion, without assumption, without hesitation. And what I saw was simple: they were ready, ready to move forward, ready to finalize everything, ready to ask for the signature they believed would give them what they wanted. Have you ever seen someone prepare for a moment without realizing that moment no longer matters? Because that's exactly where they were. The conversation came again, just as expected: calm, structured, familiar, the same words, the same tone, the same careful approach. But this time, it felt different to me, not because they had changed anything, but because I knew what they didn't. And that difference changed everything. They placed the papers in front of me again, just like before: neat, prepared, ready, their confidence steady, their expectation clear. And for a brief moment, I simply looked at them, not at the pages, not at the words, but at the situation itself, because this was the moment they had been working toward. The moment they believed would give them control. Have you ever been in a moment where everything depends on one simple action, but that action no longer holds any power? Because that's what this was. I picked up the pens slowly, just like before, feeling their attention sharpen, their focus tightening, their anticipation building, because from their perspective, this was it: the final step, the last thing needed to complete everything they had planned. And I let them believe that, completely. I didn't rush. I didn't hesitate in a way that raised suspicion. I simply moved at a pace that felt natural, expected, believable, because the illusion still mattered. Have you ever played along, even when you already know the outcome? Because that's exactly what I was doing. And in that moment, something became very clear to me, not emotionally, not dramatically, just certain. This wasn't about stopping them anymore. That had already been done. This was about showing them in a way they couldn't ignore, couldn't deny, couldn't change once they understood it. And that moment was seconds away. Because the moment I put that pen down, they were about to realize that everything they thought they had gained had already been taken away. What happens when someone finally understands that the outcome they were waiting for has already been decided without them? Because there's a kind of silence that follows truth, not confusion, not hesitation. but clarity so complete that nothing can be argued anymore. And that's exactly how it ended. Not with chaos, not with shouting, but with a single moment where everything they believed stopped existing the way they thought it did. Have you ever seen someone lose control without anyone raising their voice? Because that's what this became. The pen rested in my hand for a second longer than necessary, not because I was unsure, but because I understood the weight of what was about to happen, not for me. I had already moved past that, but for them, because they were still standing inside a reality that no longer existed. Have you ever been ahead of a situation so far ahead that the present moment feels almost delayed? Because that's exactly what I felt. I placed the pen down calmly, not dramatically, not as a refusal, not as a reaction, just a pause, and that pause was enough to shift the entire energy in the room, because expectation only holds as long as it isn't interrupted. And I had just interrupted it. They looked at me, waiting, not impatiently, not yet, but with a certainty that hadn't been challenged until that exact moment, and that certainty began to crack, not visibly at first, not completely, but enough. Enough to change everything. Have you ever seen confidence fade in real time? Because that's what I was watching. I reached forward slowly and moved something toward them, not forcefully, not with emotion, just present, and the moment it was there, the moment it became part of the conversation, the atmosphere shifted again. Deeper this time, more permanent, because this wasn't hesitation anymore, this was truth entering the room. Have you ever introduced something into a moment that makes everything else irrelevant? Because that's what this was. For a second, nothing happened. They looked at it, then at me, then back at it, their expressions holding on to confusion just long enough before recognition began to settle in, and when it didn't arrive gently. It arrived completely. Have you ever seen someone understand something and know instantly they can't change it? Because that's what I saw in that moment. The questions came quickly after that, sharper now, less controlled, no longer framed as concern or care, but as reaction, because once people lose control, they stop managing how they sound, they just respond. And their response told me everything I needed to hear, not because of what they asked, but because of how they asked it. Have you ever noticed that truth doesn't come from explanations, it comes from reactions? Because that's exactly what this was. I didn't match their energy, I didn't raise my voice, I didn't defend my actions because there was nothing to defend. What I had done wasn't reactive, it wasn't emotional, it was final, and final things don't need explanation. Have you ever realized that once something is done, nothing anyone says can undo it? Because that's what this moment became. Their confidence collapsed quickly after that, not in one dramatic moment, but in small visible shifts, the way their tone changed, the way their posture tightened, the way their certainty disappeared piece by piece, because the reality they were standing in had changed and they hadn't moved with it. They were still trying to understand a situation that had already moved past them. And that distance, that gap between what they believed and what was real, was something they couldn't close. Have you ever seen someone try to regain control and realize there's nothing left to control? Because that's exactly what was happening. And in that moment, everything they had hidden came forward, not intentionally, not carefully, but naturally, because when control is lost, truth doesn't stay hidden anymore. It shows itself completely. My son's voice changed first, sharper now, no longer controlled, no longer measured, and in that shift he said something he hadn't planned to say, something that explained everything in a way no document ever could. And that moment, that single moment, removed any remaining doubt. Have you ever heard one sentence that makes everything clear? Because that's what it was. And after that, there was nothing left to question, nothing left to argue, nothing left to explain. The situation had already resolved itself. The truth had already done its work, and all that remained was acceptance. The room fell quiet again, but this silence was different from before, not uncertain, not tense, but complete, the kind of silence that comes when something has ended exactly the way it needed to. And in that quiet, I felt something settle inside me, not victory, not relief, but peace, because this was never about winning. It was about protecting what mattered, and I had done exactly that. Have you ever chosen yourself and realized that it doesn't take anything away from you, it gives you everything back? Because that's what this moment became. I stood up slowly, not in a hurry, not with emotion, just steady, because everything that needed to be done had already been done. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was reacting to my life. I felt like I was in control of it again. Completely, they thought one signature would give them everything. But by the time I picked up that pen, I had already taken it all back.